You know, one of the most mysterious times in all of Naruto has been and still remains the Warring States period, a time when the entire world was at war, yet no hidden villages existed. For all intents and purposes, the Warring States period was World War Zero. It was the era that not only seeded the formation of the villages, but it was also the era that seeded the slowly evolving hatred that would eventually lead to the First Shinobi World War after a brief era of peace. But amongst all the war and fighting, we see nothing but anger, hatred, and death. The entire world is set afire with an ancient curse set down by those who came before, the Otsutsuki. So let's stop for a moment and imagine a world where Naruto was born just a little earlier. It's known that the Uzumaki are cousins of the Senju, and it's very likely that Naruto's genes trace all the way back to them. So for a moment, let's assume that Naruto is born in this era, and we'll see how it goes. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so if you subscribe in the next 22 minutes, the ice cream truck will visit your neighborhood twice as often this summer. And if you click the bell, then heck, the guy running the ice cream truck will give you a discount. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. The wind was blowing. The smell of blood and rotten flesh permeated the air. The crows were cawing and crying out in the cloudy skies. Above even them, the vultures circled. Among the bodies were those bearing a fan on their backs, but there were a few others bearing the horizontal vajra of the Senju. At this point though, did it even matter? Lives had ended. Their lives were over. They were dead. There was no bringing them back, and now, in death, the deceased Senju and Uchiha found themselves on the same side. The other side, that is to say, the afterlife. A world where they looked down upon their lives and realized how petty and useless those moments were. The flocks of children separated from their parents. The parents separated from their children. Surely those who had crossed over were faced with the conviction of what they had done. The eyes of those they had murdered and helped murder. In death there was brotherhood, and none in life were so enlightened to understand such. These thoughts were not the thoughts of Butsuma Senju as he walked the battlefield, taking quick survey of the dead he may have known personally. Normally that was a lot. There were none still remaining from his childhood. Only his wife remained, and that was specifically because she tended to be pregnant much of the time. Not always, but there was a point that he realized that her place was not on the battlefield. The same wasn't true for his other friends. Every hand he shook, it was as if he could see their future. Those same hands extended in kindness towards their clan head would soon be covered in blood and flies, pale as ghosts, for that they would soon become ghosts. In honesty, the word ghost sort of fit well to every Senju and Uchiha. In a world where the average life expectancy was 30, all were nothing more than ghosts. Specters attached to the bodies of those who had yet to die. Specters of war. But as he looked over the bodies, preparing in his mind the words he would speak to the widows, widowers, fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters, but among the screaming in his head, he heard another sound echoing out among the mist. An animal? No, it wasn't. This was no coyote coming to devour the bodies of the dead before they could become host to disease. It was human, crying, wailing. Some mother or child has found someone dear to them, no doubt, he said as he continued to note the losses. But the sound didn't end, and it set him on edge. He had heard crying, but something was different here. This sent shivers down his spine. He felt an urge that wasn't present. Not until Hashirama had been born, renewed by the somewhat recent arrival of Tobirama. He looked back across the battlefield and saw nobody standing. He stood from his kneeling position and stepped through the blood and gore in the direction of the cries. "Hello?" he cried out. No answer. Continual wailing. He stepped over and across bodies, intentionally planting his heel into the corpses of the Uchiha as he came closer. Among the bodies and death, a single life sprang forth. A tiny child crying out, shivering in the cold, its lips beginning to turn blue as hypothermia set in. Instinctively, Butsuma reached down to it, but the moment his hand touched the skin of the poor, swaddled bundle of misery, his mind heard a roar. His back felt the ripping of claws, and his hand burned as if it plunged itself into an open fire. In his eyes, he witnessed the spectral face of a fox, an ancient god formed from the very earth itself, a force of nature. The primal darkness of nature manifest into a hateful spirit, a spirit that bound itself to this form. In a moment, that fatherly instinct was gone, replaced with the cold strategist who saw this child not a soul to be loved, but a weapon to be used against his enemies. Once again, he carefully touched this child, finding it now possible and far less painful to make contact. He lifted it up into his bosom and stood, having forgotten all about what he had originally come here for. He had been here to find those who had perished, but had found something so much more interesting. He brought it back with him to his dwelling, and that's basically the story of Naruto's infancy. A foundling abandoned in the midst of war, a living casualty. Cruel, but status quo for the world they were living in. To be parentless was nothing new. To be a child was a liability. Child, adult, male, female, such distinctions fell away. They were frivolous. Nobody had the luxury of any of them. The only distinction that mattered in this world was ally or enemy. The rest was meaningless. In this world, you lived quick and died horribly early, with only enough time to hopefully produce an heir. 2, if you were lucky. This child was a miracle, not for any sentimental reasons, but due to the perfect storm it had landed in, with the possession of Butsuma. So imagine the surprise Butsuma's wife when she saw that he brought home a little package and told her to nurse it along with Tobirama. It must have been quite the surprise. But in this era, a woman had her own duties as well. If she weren't on the battlefield, then she was pregnant and nursing. Does that sound bad? Well, it should. We're talking about an era of child soldiers. Time was not something people had in spades. It was a rare commodity that was spent securing one's future. Personal life? No such thing. You were born a Senju, a warrior. You lived and died by that. You were expected to be nothing but that. Anything else was frivolous. Personality? Lay it aside. Grief? Fear? You're a machine, assembled and disassembled. Nobody has a future, only a legacy, and that legacy was the Senju clan. Be born, fight, make a baby to replace you, and then die. This was your reward for being conceived and winning that cosmic race between all the other possible yous that died the moment you hit the egg first. From the beginning, you were killing to live. You expected it to be any different? That's what it was to be a Senju in the era of the Warring States. And that was something Naruto would soon come to learn. He had just won the biggest lottery in the world, and his prize would be endless suffering as a weapon. This was something Naruto was conditioned to learn as he grew beside his new elder brothers. Brothers in not genes, but in blood. Specifically the blood they shed and spilled together. Training day in, day out. By age 6, he could do 100 pull-ups, 100 sit-ups, 50 if they were inverted, 100 push-ups. Each one fit and strong enough to wage war against even their older counterparts. No longer children, but tiny adults. And as they witnessed their first battle, what was left of their young mind was either forced to mature or crack. Years passed in a flash. Suddenly, they were on the battlefield. Naruto had a blade, wore the standard armor of the Senju. He ran through the trees and mountains, his breath moving as fast as his heart and his legs. There was an explosion as a kunai with a paper bomb hit the ground about 3 meters to his left. He was lucky that a rock was there, or the ringing in his ears and concussive shock to his body would be the least of his worries. He heard the distant clamor of battle cries. They were in full retreat. The Uchiha were coming. At their head was Tajima Uchiha, the oldest and most skilled Uchiha in the clan. It had been a disaster. On their way through a valley, they had been met with the Uchiha to their front, Uchiha forces flanking them on the right and left, having taken the higher ground. He saw flames before him as it appeared that the Uchiha were now sealing off their only exit, closing the box. To his right was his childhood friend Itsuko. Suddenly, an explosive kunai landed beside him. Itsuko, with the strength of every ounce of his chakra, pushed Naruto over a rock and into a cave as it exploded. For the sake of the viewer, I won't describe this, but for Naruto's eyes, he would suddenly see the meaning of life. Not the life he was supposed to have, but the life he was forced to have. He had been born only to suffer and die an excruciatingly painful death. For a second, he envied Itsuko. He hit the cave floor hard, cracking his head open a little on a rock. There was some blood, but to his knowledge there wasn't a fracture. He lifted his head up over the rock to look and see the masses of Senju that had taken to the rear running. He watched them run and suddenly started falling as kunai and crossbow bolts struck from afar. Tears were forming in his eyes as he watched. No, this isn't real. This can't be real. What nightmare have I been born into? Suddenly, a hand grabbed his mouth as an arm wrapped around his waist and pulled him deeper into the cave. Naruto pulled out his broken sword and swung like mad, his muffled screams drowned out by the fear in his head. Suddenly, he turned the blade on himself and tried to stab. He would rather die by his own hand than suffer what he had heard the Uchiha do to prisoners. What he knew the Senju did to prisoners. No, his hand was gripped. He looked over to see Hashirama. Calm, Ototo, calm. Naruto slowly stopped fighting. They're gonna be on top of us soon, Hashirama, came the voice of Itama. Hashirama stood. I know. Stay away from the entrance. He began to weave hand signs as suddenly wood sprang up from the earth and stones, shattering the rock and forcing a controlled cave-in, something to conceal the surface. They were then cast into darkness. Utilizing fire release, Kawarama gave them light. Slowly the hand let go, revealing it to be Tobirama. Naruto sat there, his face lit up by only the flames. Tobirama would wipe the sweat, snot, and saliva from his hands onto his pants. Ew. Naruto's breathing was still heavy, his mind processing things. Slowly, his eyes squinted, his nose scrunching up as his teeth shone in a twisted antonym of a grin. Tears streamed down his face as he began to cry, first as a whimper, then as a full wail. Suddenly, a hand struck his face. "Quiet, you stupid bastard, they'll hear us," Tobirama shouted. Hashirama held his hand out to Tobirama and knelt down beside Naruto. "It's okay, let him cry." Tobirama removed his breastplate and hugged up to Naruto. This was comfort, but it had further usage as the cloth of his shirt would bury the sounds of his crying. "It's okay," he said. "It's okay, you're safe now." "Are we?" Itama asked. "Are we really safe? Didn't you see the death out there? The amount of Uchiha on their way? We're going to die." "Nobody's going to die," Tobirama said. "Not so long as we play it safe." Tobirama looked around. "We'll ride out the storm." He knelt down and put his hand to the ground. As a sensory type, Tobirama could sense those nearby. He was silently praying that no Uchiha sensory types were nearby, and if they were, hopefully the Senju's presence was being drowned out and concealed by the multitude of other Uchiha nearby. Kawaraama stood there silently. "We're gonna make it out of this, guys, I promise. We'll be home by the end of the day. Tonight we'll be in our beds, and tomorrow we'll wake up as if this was all just a bad dream. Just have faith." Tobirama stood and reached out to Kawarama's hand, sniffing the flame. "Get down! They're right on top of us!" The four of them hit the ground and pressed against a wall. Itama was curled up, hugged up to Kawarama, letting out a quick whelp of fear. Kawarama put his arm around his little brother and pulled them closer. As if war weren't horrible enough, it also meant a lack of supplies. That being said, the day Itama was born, the boy's mother died. She couldn't stop bleeding. They buried her. Hashirama was so young, but he remembered that day vividly. His father did not cry. Was it that he didn't care? No. This was one of the most painful deaths he had witnessed, but still he didn't cry. A mixture of pride and showing his strength to his clan, as well as desensitization. He had just seen so much death, killing, being killed. During this era, once you had done this enough, seen it enough, lived long enough, it just clicked to you that this is what it was. You did it for your clan and your clan only. No greater honor. This was the birthplace of the Will of Fire. Nursed on the blood spilt during the warring era, the Will of Fire was sung to sleep by the lullabies of war. Pride, honor, love of your clan. That was the beginning. Having thought back to that day often, Hashirama supposed that his mother also had the Will of Fire. Maybe she did not die on the battlefield, but she had given rise, through pain and death, to 4 strong boys who would push the Senju to greater heights. Hashirama had vowed that he would not die until he had changed the world. This was his nindo, his ninja way. He would make the most of his life to make the world a better place no matter the cost or sacrifice, and he refused to die until this was accomplished. As he held the shaking and weeping Naruto, he knew that he wasn't the only one who desired this. His 4 brothers shared that same dream, the same nindo. They would change the world. Count on it. Hours had passed them by. Night had come. By the glow of the moon, under the guidance of Tobirama, they made their move. They dug themselves out of the cave with Earth style and began to head towards their village, east, keeping close to the trees. Tobirama took point as he was the one with the keenest senses who knew where Uchiha, Shinobi, and traps alike would be posted. Moving for about 2 miles, they'd eventually get out of the newly claimed Uchiha territory and made a break for home. Butsuma stood there by the gate as the sun began to rise. "No word yet," one of his lieutenants said. Butsuma pursed his lips and let out a sigh. Something went wrong. As the sun rose over the horizon, its light cast out upon the trees as a few tiny figures began to make their way out. He looked and recognized them. "My sons." Hashirama was walking. On his back was the now unconscious Naruto. On Hashirama's face was painted a smile, his oath of survival to his brothers having been fulfilled. On the opposite side, with just a little more issue, was Kawarama, his ever-present smile of face present and a sleeping Itama on his back. Between the two was Tobirama, his glowering expression showing his frustration as he carried not only his own gear, but the packs of Hashirama and Kawarama as well. They stepped into the settlement. Butsuma walked up to them. "Is anyone injured?" Hashirama looked around at his tiny group. "I don't think so. Not bad, at least. Naruto seems to have a hit on his head, but the bleeding stopped hours ago." Butsuma gave a nod of approval. "Wake them up. I need to debrief them." Tobirama scoffed. "Good luck. We've been trying to wake them for at least half an hour." He dropped the packs. "They lost their cool. I doubt they can even remember the battle clearly right now. I remember everything. I'll go for debriefing. Just let them sleep." Butsuma would then close his eyes with a slight touch of disappointment. "Fair. Let's go then." He turned to walk off with Tobirama before looking back at his other sons. "Hashirama, Kawarama, you both are dismissed as well. Go get some rest." Kawarama sighed. "Not before a bath. I hate going to bed all sweaty and dirty." They made their way to the house. Butsuma pulled Tobirama into a private room. Did he show? Tobirama shook his head. He displayed no signs of awakening. Butsuma sighed once again in disappointment. "Was the battle that big?" Tobirama nodded. "As far as I can tell, not a single survivor besides us." Butsuma scratched the back of his head. "Was Naruto at the forefront or the rear?" "The center," Tobirama responded. Once the call to retreat sounded, he was in the back along with the other children as per the final order of the commander. Butsuma propped up against the wall. "It looks like we'll need to find another supply route." "One final thing, father," Tobirama said. "Tajima Uchiha was there. He led the forces." Butsuma's interest was piqued. "Tajima personally appeared to stop your forces." Tobirama nodded. "It appears the Uchiha intended to crush us, and crush us they did." Butsuma stood there further. He looked down at his son out of the corner of his eye and motioned with his head, telling him he was dismissed without words. Tobirama began to leave when suddenly Butsuma came to the door and shouted out, "Don't forget the gear!" He pointed towards the entrance where the two packs sat. "We're already in a supply crisis. We can't afford to lose any working gear." Tobirama begrudgingly returned for the packs, tossing them over his shoulder before setting out for home. Naruto's sleep was restless. The nights he spent on the battlefield, the sound of distant explosions, sleeping in shifts, all of it hit him, even while at home. His mind, in the weakened and vulnerable state of near sleep, would begin to relive these things, being unable to understand where it was. Safety no longer felt safe, not while he was asleep. Even sometimes when he was awake, he would immediately sit forward in terror. "The Hagoromo clan's on our flank," he shouted. Tobirama, sitting by the desk, writing in a notebook as he read through various guides and manuscripts, wouldn't even raise his head to look back. "I think your information's a little outdated, Naruto." Naruto sat there and looked out the window to see the bright blue sky. It was about noon. To his left was Kawarama laying up against the wall. Kawarama was by far the heart of the brothers. He was the one always telling them to keep believing and always be the first to go to provide for the others, particularly for the youngest brother Itama, who was out of all of them the weakest of constitution. They used to place bets on how long it would take Itama to piss himself during a campaign. Naruto admitted that it was a little mean to pick on him like that, but Hashirama had explained once that it served as a little levity among their little family, and helped Itama keep his mind off the coming threat of death. Speaking of Hashirama, Naruto looked to the right to see him stuffing his face with food. Hashirama paused, looking up for only a moment when Naruto made mention of the Hagoromo clan. Maybe it was a little fear suddenly robbing his appetite. Maybe he was just curious as to what battle Naruto was dreaming about. Whatever it was, it passed and he went back to his meal. Hashirama had a way of making even pig slop look like the most delicious thing in the world. Naruto sighed and stood and came up to a window and looked out of it. As Naruto looked outside, he spoke. "How long until we have to go back?" "We get the rest of the week off," Tobirama said. Naruto looked over. "What day is it?" "Tuesday. We get 4 days to ourselves. Then we prepare for the next one." Naruto's shoulders shrugged in disappointment. "I don't want to go back." "I don't think anyone does," Hashirama says. "Then why are we even fighting anymore? If no one wants to fight, then why are we fighting?" Hashirama scoffed. "Hell if I know. Seems a little pointless. I had thought for a time that it was about land, maybe power or riches, but I don't think it's any of those things. We already have so much land, our clan is the most prestigious among the others, and we're wasting more resources fighting than can be gained by winning. I think this goes deeper. I think this is merely two clans and their allies being petty. We kill them and they kill us. That's the only reason." "Well, it's a crappy reason," Naruto said. Hashirama nodded. "So many people are fighting and dying, and for what? Because we need revenge for killing and being killed? It's asinine." "I wish we lived in a world where the Senju and Uchiha were friends," Itama said. "I bet if we set aside our differences, we could be close with them." Tobirama remained silent, continuing to examine his books. He was always a bit of an egghead. He liked to experiment and create new jutsus. He even tended to cross certain ethical lines to create differing jutsu, touching upon forbidden knowledge that should probably never be touched. This brought no ire from their father, however, as Butsuma believed this to be the natural course of action for a war such as this, and was even proud of Tobirama for working so hard in his off time to find new ways to destroy the enemy. "What are you doing?" Naruto asked. "I'm studying Fuin Jutsu." Naruto cocked his head a little. "Why?" Tobirama took a moment to respond, as if he were trying to separate the knowledge he was taking in with his conscious thought. "Because the seals we have use varying effects depending on what's written. They can be used for far more than just locking things. They can encode one's will onto reality itself." "That sounds like a stretch," Hashirama said. Tobirama sighed. "Say whatever you will, but when I'm flying through the air at the speed of light, maybe you'll finally appreciate my genius." "We'll appreciate your humility too," Hashirama tacked on at the end, capping off the conversation. They had 4 days off to do whatever they pleased, but nothing seemed to attract them or pose enjoyment. They were merely in an interlude between two different battles. They had reached the eye of the storm, calm seas and even sunlight, but it was all sullied when one looked up and saw the swirling walls of clouds spinning about them, the lightning sending a clear warning of what was to come. That's what it felt like anyway. Their dread seemed to cause time to speed up even more as days slipped into night and restless nights slipped into tiresome mornings. It was everything they could do to get Itama to eat. Appetites were just another casualty of war every time they knew a battle was coming, but the brotherly love of Kawarama and Hashirama, their smiles and gentle hugs and assurances were enough to keep him slowly intaking enough to at least survive. Most of their time off they spent outside, talking about their shared dream of peace, but as time slowly passed them by, they eventually found themselves once more in battle. As if it had been a premonition of the future, Naruto's dream came true. The Uchiha and the Hagoromo clans had flanked them on both sides, splitting the Senju forces into two separate bodies as both Uchiha and Hagoromo warriors encircled the severed half, slowly tightening the circle like a noose. Naruto just stood there. Itama would rush past him with tears in his eyes and his blade in his hand. "No, no," he cried out. He looked back. "Naruto, help me!" Naruto rushed to his side. "What is it?" Itama's tears continued rolling down his cheek. "Kawarama, he's in that group." Naruto was shocked. "What? Why? He was supposed to be stationed in the rear with you." Itama shook his head. "I was feeling queasy and he wanted to rush forward to see if anyone had anything to settle my stomach. He's trapped. Please, we gotta save him." Itama rushed off. Naruto put his fingers to his mouth and blew as hard as he could. In a puff of smoke, Hashirama appeared. "What's the emergency?" Naruto looked around. "Where's Tobirama?" Hashirama looked. "No clue. Forget him. What's wrong?" Naruto began to explain. Hashirama's face was struck with horror as he ran towards the front lines, towards where Itama had gone. Naruto also rushed out in that direction. As they came closer, they saw where their forces met the Uchiha and Senju, trying to break the line, but so far having no success. Hashirama weaved his hand signs and began to form trees and vines and limbs, many of which were tearing through enemy bodies. At about that time, Tobirama appeared there in a bolt of lightning, a kunai in his teeth bearing a mark. "Told you it would work." Hashirama blew him off. "We've got problems. Kawarama is trapped on the front lines." Tobirama would point back. "No worries, we've got reinforcements." Naruto looked back. They weren't Senju. Who were they? Hashirama looked back. "Is that the Sarutobi and Shimura clans?" Tobirama nodded. "The pact went through. They've agreed to support us. They'll help us break through." The reinforcements bolstered the Senju forces, splitting the Uchiha and Hagoromo apart before encircling them as well, turning their own strategy against them. The worst part was the Uchiha and Hagoromo clans had no reinforcements, so it became like shooting fish in a barrel. As they rushed around, they found various bodies strewn across the ground. "Kawarama!" Itama shouted. "Kawarama!" They would see a field medic kneeling down. He raised his hand. "Over here." The four brothers rushed over to see Kawarama lying there, grimacing in pain as the medic was attempting to heal his wounds. The medic looked at them with a look in his eye that told them everything that could be said in words. Itama came to Kawarama's side. Big brother, it's me. Please, look at me." Kawarama did as was bidden. He opened his left eye and looked at Itama. Hashirama knelt down. "What happened?" The medic began to speak. "He's been stabbed 5 times. The wounds are deep, passing from one side to the other, likely from a tanto." Tobirama stood over them, his hand nervously stroking the imaginary goatee that he was too young to grow. He turned away from the sight. Hashirama looked down at all the blood and then up to the medic. Is it gonna be alright?" The medic looked to Hashirama. He shook his head. "I'll give you some time alone." He pulled his hands back and stood. Itama saw this and almost freaked out. No, come back!" He pressed his hands against Kawarama's wounds. "Hurry, guys! Find something to press against his wounds. We've got to stop the bleeding." "Itama," Hashirama spoke. Itama hadn't heard it. He was ripping the sleeves off his shirt to press against the wound. "Itama," Hashirama snapped in an attempt to bring attention to him. "Stop. Kawarama's not gonna make—" "Shut up! You're not a doctor, Hashirama," Itama said as he began to press his clothes into Kawarama's wounds. Kawarama let out a gasp, the utter agony so terrible that it could not escape his throat. Hashirama snapped again. "Quit it, Itama. I may not be a doctor, but that guy was, and he says it's too late. We'd do better to comfort him." Itama's face showed horror mixed with disbelief. "No, he can be saved if we just—" Tobirama lifted Itama by the collar. "Stop it, fool." Itama's blood ran cold, but his heart slowly began to warm as he saw Tobirama's face stained with tears that he had fought so hard and failed to hide. "You're hurting him," Tobirama said, barely able to speak louder than a whisper. Itama began to give in to his emotions, moving straight from disbelief into grief. Itama fell to his knees. It's my fault. If I had been stronger, if I hadn't puked, you wouldn't have got caught in the trap." Kawarama's breathing was labored. He opened his eyes and looked to Itama, reaching out with his bloody palm to take one of the hands Itama was using to cover his crying eyes. "No, little brother, I was the one who rushed off." Itama took Kawarama's hand in both of his own. "But you did it for me. How can I ever forgive myself?" "Itama, please don't blame yourself. I love you, that's why I went forward. Whether I knew it was dangerous or not, I would have gone anywhere to help you. You're my little brother. I would die for you." Kawarama almost seemed to pass out. He pulled his head back up. "Guys, lights out is coming." Kawarama took a deep wheezing breath and held it there for a few seconds before letting it back out. "Listen, Itama, do you love me, little brother?" Itama nodded. "I love you, Kawarama. I love you. Kawarama would raise his hand and take off a necklace he'd been wearing and give it to Itama. Little brother, if you love me, then don't blame yourself. He put the necklace into his hand. I'll be with you forever. Itama took the necklace and began to weep. Kawarama closed his eyes and laid back on Hashirama's chest. Sorry guys, I only had the one necklace. Just divvy my stuff up between you when you get back home. Naruto was on his knees, crying. Tobirama spoke. We aren't vultures, Kawarama. Your stuff is yours. It will always be yours. Kawarama laughed a little. Vultures. You're not vultures. If you feel that way, then take only one of my things, as a memento, to remember me. Hashirama nodded. Only one thing. One thing. Kawarama opened his eyes once more. Guys, come here. I want to see your faces. Hashirama repositioned himself to be seen. He was their rock, the one who projected strength. But right now his heart was shattered, and despite his smile being present to tell everyone it would be okay, his eyes were telling a different story. Bitter tears dropping down his cheeks from his eyes that asked why couldn't it have been him instead. Tobirama would kneel down beside Itama, his stoic face betraying him as his eyes displayed utter agony in his spirit. Kawarama sat there and looked at them. Shame I can't see true, genuine smiles one last time. Each of you are my world. I'm glad at least that I got to die for you. I love. Kawarama's head fell back as his soul left his body. Itama just sat there silently crying, his mind yet to have realized that his brother had actually died. Tobirama looked away, unable to bear the sight any longer, and Hashirama heaved a breath split into three, closing Kawarama's eyes. Naruto was destroyed. He stood there and turned back around and began to step back. Kawarama, he said, as if calling his name might somehow wake him up. As Naruto stepped away, he saw every moment he had ever spent with Kawarama at once. Every kind thing he had ever done. His rescue of Naruto during battle against the Uchiha, which had resulted in the boy getting a scar on his cheek, and now he just imagined him all alone. When he needed Naruto most, when Naruto could finally repay him for that scar on his cheek, he wasn't there. Naruto felt like he was having a panic attack. He hit his knees, hyperventilating. He felt a different anger, a new rage. For a moment, his anger and this new anger synced up, yet Naruto could tell it wasn't his anger. And a moment later, he was no longer in control. He had suddenly been thrown into the back seat, and something new had taken the wheel. Something malevolent. A burst of orangish red chakra burst out like a volcano erupting. He roared out in pure rage. He felt like a killer, like he could murder anyone right now. Murder his allies, murder his friends, murder his family, murder himself. The rage built up, weighed like a ton of bricks upon his psyche, and now that rage was boiling out. His hand hit the ground as his chakra cloak began to grow, overtaking his body in a pure crimson shell before tightening into a deeper red, tails growing out behind him, his face now concealed in a blood-red visage in which only his glowing eyes and mouth could be seen. Suddenly, he began to grow in size as muscle and sinew crossed over the bones, turning him into some zombie kitsune, no skin covering it. Hashirama, Tobirama, and Itama looked on in horror as their brother appeared to become something completely inhuman. Slowly, the skin and fur began to appear as the Nine Tails showed up in all of its glory. Its tails began to swipe around as Senju, Sarutobi, and Shimura clan members began to scatter. Tobirama stood. He did it! He's utilizing the full power of the Nine Tails! Itama was confused as much as he was terrified. Hashirama, remember what father said if you ever lost control. You gotta do it now. Hashirama began to weave his hand signs and formed a massive wood golem that he rode upon. The Nine Tails turned back and attempted to swipe at him. The wood golem dodged to the side and came closer as the hand of the wood golem would reach out and grip Kurama's forehead. The beast would let out a low, muffled growl as it came to a stop. It just sat there for a moment. Hashirama jumped across to the beast and made its way to its ear. Naruto, it's okay. I know you're sad. I know you're scared. It's okay, but please, be sad and scared as yourself. He began to slowly and gently sing the lullaby that their mother had sung for them as they all went down to sleep in their infancy. The beast hit the ground and began to evaporate. In its place remained only Naruto. Tobirama passed through the steam to see Hashirama holding him. It's okay. I'm here, Hashirama said. He looked up at Tobirama and gave a slight nod. We need to return home to father. He needs to know about this. Tobirama nodded as he looked at Itama, who was still mourning for Kawarama. That's for the best. I don't know if we can physically continue on this mission or not. And so they returned home where they would inform their father of Kawarama's sacrifice as well as Naruto's transformation. Bittersweet news indeed. Naruto's abilities could turn the tide of the war if he ever gained control of them, but that was an objective for another day. For now, they would lament. Death had once more touched their family, and as Kawarama was lowered into the ground, Naruto could only think of how pointless his death was. Pointless, meaningless, as all their lives seemed to be at this point. Well, that was a dark one. As I'm sure you've guessed, this is merely part 1 of the story. I hope to continue this story, as despite the darkness of this what if, it was something I was very passionate about making. The Warring States period is one of the biggest eras of Naruto, and yet it has so little coverage. That's the end of this story for now, but I'm interested to see what you think. Leave a comment below and tell me what part you enjoyed the most. What would you do differently? Be sure to tell us. Until next time, peace out.
Did you enjoy our video? Well, then be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.